Okay, so this is part 2 of the story of Tisha B'Av, coming from Ma'am Loez, translated by Aryeh Kaplan. So the first video was about 45 minutes, so here we go. We ended off with Titus came into the scene. So Titus was not impressed. He knew that the Jews who were trying to escape to the Romans would be killed, but he said, "Whoever dies of those who leave Jerusalem, let him die." At the very worst, Titus did not stop trying to break the will of the Jerusalemites. When the leaders of the Zealots heard Titus's words, they became angry and did even more evil against their own people. They would curse Titus and arouse his anger so that there would be no hope of peace. The Zealots said to the people, "It is better for us to die free of starvation and fire in God's temple and sanctuary than to have the yoke of the Romans on us. What good is it for us to live a few extra years and see the destruction of our temple? It is best that we die at this time and go to the great light of eternal life and rest in the Garden of Eden." When Titus realized that the people would never give in, he applied a battering ram to the wall. He would tear down the wall and rescue the Romans captured by Eleazar, Yochanan, and Shimon, the leaders of the Zealots, and he would kill the Zealot terrorist. Titus applied the battering ram to the wall. One of Titus's men was a boy by the name of Namganim, the son of Antiochus the Macedonian. This Macedonian prince had come to help Titus. He had received orders from Titus's father, the Roman Emperor Vespasian, to join Titus. He was able to run very well, but he was not very intelligent. The young boy said to Titus, "I am very surprised. You have been able to conquer every nation on earth. What has taken you so long? Why can't you kill all the Jews standing on the outside wall?" Titus laughed at the young Greek prince and said, What are you talking? Why don't you try to do it? Take your sword and show your strength against them." The young Greek prince gathered all the Macedonian soldiers and began to wage war with arrows and spears against the Jews. The Jews were very arrogant against the Macedonians and killed many of them. The Jews outside the wall killed many Macedonians, and also those on the wall killed many more. Eventually, they were all killed. Not a single Macedonian returned. Only the Greek prince escaped, since he could run very fast and was thus able to return to Titus. This young prince was the descendant of Alexander the Great. Joseph the priest, Josephus, was with Titus at the time. He said to the Macedonian prince, "Whose son are you?" He said, "I am the descendant of Alexander, 10 generations removed." "True, it is obvious that you are his descendant. I can see it from your courage, but courage requires strength. If a person wants to be a ruler like Alexander, he must do mighty deeds as he did. It would be nice for you to be like him. If you want to be a mighty warrior like Alexander, fight against a powerful nation like the Israelites, my people." We know that Alexander would come alone to a city at night. He would put a ladder up against the wall into the city, and all night long he would kill the inhabitants of the city. In the morning, the people in the area would ask, "What is this terrible loud voice in the city?" Others would answer, "It is known that Alexander is in the city." The people of his city would then run and break down the city's gates and enter the city and help King Alexander. Our King David also fought alone against the giants. Alexander fought alone inside the city. David fought alone in the camp of the Nephilim giants. When Avishai, the brother of Joab ben Zeruiah, heard that David was fighting in the camp of the Nephilim, he went to join him. David was killing the Nephilim. Then one came behind David to kill him. When he lifted his hand to kill him, Avishai grabbed the person trying to strike David by the shield. And David turned around and killed the giant. We know that when Alexander attacked the city by himself, he was saved by the sins of that city. It was given over into his hands. King David was saved by the Holy Spirit that was with him whenever he sat or stood. You too, Prince, will be protected, and you will not die in Jerusalem when you fight the Jews. You will be saved by the sins of Jerusalem. This is a deadly trap for them. Therefore, you should realize that the Romans are not delaying because they are lazy. They are behaving wisely. They realize that they are fighting against a powerful, strong nation, but today a little of its strength was lost. Tell this to anyone who asks you. After these events, Titus divided his entire camp into 4 groups and placed them around the wall. He set up 4 iron battering rams to shatter the wall on all 4 sides. One battering ram was set up against the Antonina wall. It was 30 cubits or 45 feet long. That night, Yochanan, the head of the terrorists, left the camp with his men. They dug the dirt under the wheels of the wagon that carried the battering ram. All Titus's battering rams were set up on wagons. Each one had a round, solid head and a thick neck. None had horns on their heads except for the two main rams that he brought there from the tower. Under the wagons, Rabbi Yochanan's men placed boards coated with tar, pitch, and sulfur. Over these, he poured more tar, pitch, and sulfur. Then he covered them with skin and set them on fire. These boards caused the feet of the battering rams to burn. The Romans who were guarding the battering ram were sleeping on the wagon and did not know what the terrorists had done. They were sound asleep and were not aware of what was happening. The fire started burning the feet of the ram, and it fell on the guards, killing them. The Roman camp became very confused. They said, "We cannot fight against a city like Jerusalem anymore. They have burned all our siege machinery. We no longer have weapons to crush the walls. We brought 50 battering rams with us, and only the 3 on the wagons remained. What can we do now if the terrorists burn these 3 as well? What will we use to batter down the wall? How can we fight against the city anymore? They even destroyed our siege towers. We only have 2 left. How can we fight against the city with nothing more than 2 siege towers?" We must remember that the people of Edephet did to us when we tried to attack them with nothing but siege towers. The terrorists were listening to the Romans talk from inside the wall and from on top of the wall. The leaders of the Jewish terrorists laughed at the Romans. They screamed derision at them for what they were saying. When Titus heard this mockery, he was infuriated. He set up the remaining 3 battering rams that were left from the 50 that he brought from Rome. He placed the 3 battering rams in the place of the one that had been burned and set them up against the outer wall. While the Romans were doing this, 4 young Jewish boys were seized with a feeling of patriotism and loyalty to God's temple. One said to the other, "Come, let us sacrifice ourselves for God." The names of the 4 Jewish boys were Tophsius the Galileite, Magarus the Hebronite, Jerome this Samarian, and Arius of Jerusalem. They put on their weapons and went out to the Roman camp. The Romans were guarding the 3 remaining battering rams, trying to decide how to breach the wall of Jerusalem and which wall would be most vulnerable. The 4 young Jewish men advanced without fear against the Roman camp, standing around the battering rams, and attacked them. They were able to kill the guards and chase the others away, while 2 of the Jewish men were chasing away anyone who wanted to come near the battering rams to help, and many of the Romans were fleeing. The 2 other young men from Jerusalem and Samaria set the battering rams on fire. The fire burned the wood of the battering rams. The 4 men were very brave and did not let the Romans come close and put the fire out until the feet of the rams were burned and the rams had fallen to the ground. The Romans were shooting arrows at them from a distance and had aimed their catapults against them. However, they were afraid to approach these 4 warriors because they recognized their great strength in battle. These 4 Jewish men were so powerful that they were not afraid of 1,000 warriors. All 4 together could face 10,000 Roman legionnaires. At the time, there were 3,000 legionnaires guarding the rams, and these 4 young men were not concerned about them. The Romans were doing everything in their power to hit these 4 Jewish soldiers with catapult bolts, or at least to chase them away, so that they could put out the fire to save their battering rams. The Jewish men, however, did not move. They stood their ground until all of the battering rams were burned, and only the iron parts were left. These young Jewish men were such great soldiers that one of them could chase 1,000 of the enemy. From his camp, Titus heard about these 4 mighty Jewish warriors. He gathered his entire camp to save the battering rams from the fire and to capture those boys, but he was not able to do so because in the interim, Shimon, Yochanan, and Eleazar and their men had gone out to help them. Eleazar remained to guard the gate, and Shimon and Yochanan sounded the attack, chasing the Romans away from the burning battering rams. They saved the 4 brave Jewish boys from being killed by the Romans who had surrounded them and cut them off from the Jerusalem gates. The 4 young men thus did not die in this battle. Many Roman legionnaires died. Thus, Titus When Titus received the tally, he was informed that 10,500 legionnaires had been killed in that foray. Titus then gathered the entire Roman camp to fight against the Jews together. He would increase the ferocity of the battle. The Romans approached the wall of Jerusalem. They were an arrow shot away when they began shouting at the Jews. Are you bulls or rams or goats that you have to fight from inside a wall? Do you want to be slaughtered inside your walls like cattle and goats are killed in their slaughtering pens? You are true warriors. If you really know how to fight, fight like men. Let's face each other on this field face to face. Let's see who's a mighty warrior. The leaders of the terrorists heard these words, and they said to the fighting men in Jerusalem, Who among you volunteers to go with us? Who will volunteer, they asked, to go out against these dogs? Let us see how strong they are. Who will fight for the glory of God's temple and his city? 500 mighty warriors volunteered. They attacked the Romans suddenly. The Jewish soldiers killed 8,000 legionnaires and repulsed the rest of them from the city. On that day, the power of the Jews became well known to the Romans. There were 40,000 legionnaires fighting 5,000 Jews, and the Jews were able to kill 8,000 legionnaires, chasing the rest away. Not a single Jew fell in that battle. The Romans could not stand up against the Jewish camp because the Jews were mighty on that day. The Romans set up a battle line at a distance to shoot arrows and catapult bolts at the Jews. The Jews said to them, Come close, come fight like men. You're the ones that called us out to fight. We came out. Why don't you come fight? All you're doing now is shooting arrows and catapult bolts at us from a distance. Do you think we are dogs? Do you think we are afraid of your bolts and arrows? We're men. We're your masters. You're running away from us just as a slave runs from his master. You're afraid of us. I want to point out that even though the temple, the city was laid siege and, it was slowly being captured, giving the people time to repent, there were still these miracles like this that were happening on a basis where miracles and miracles were happening. When Titus saw that his camp had fled from the Jews and that Romans were falling before the Jews, he screamed at his people, This is a humiliation for you, he said. Romans, you should be ashamed to run away from those Jews. They are hungry and thirsty after being shut up in the siege. Woe is to you, Romans! Where will you bring your humiliation? Nations will hear that you were conquered and defeated, that you had fled from before the Jews who are dying of starvation. You have conquered the entire land. There is only one wall left standing. They have very few weapons and still fewer troops. We have many. There is no one who will come to help the Jews. All the nations are on our side. They are our allies. What's wrong with you? Why are you running from them? You are fleeing from them as a bird flees from an eagle. True, the Jews are ready to die for their land and for the temple. But why aren't you willing to sacrifice? Why aren't you willing to die in battle against them? Make a name for yourselves. Fight like men, like Romans. On that day, the Jews became strong and were victorious. They returned to Jerusalem triumphantly after giving the Romans a bitter defeat. Titus gave orders to set up 2 siege towers that the Romans still had. This was the only siege machinery that the Romans had left over all that they had brought from Rome. Now Titus gave orders to build new siege towers to fight against the walls of Jerusalem. The Roman carpenters began to make the bulwarks in the place that Titus told them. Jewish slaves helped them until the beams of the battering rams stood between the towers. After the work was done, all that remained was to hang the rams between the towers and to batter the wall. The Romans felt safe from the Jews and were telling one another that not a single soldier would remain alive among the Jews. The Jews had not come after them for a long time. One night, just before morning, the 3 Jewish leaders of the terrorists, Eleazar, Yochanan, and Shimon, had a meeting to decide what to do. Eleazar said to them, In the last battle that we fought against 3 battering rams, 4 of our warriors went out and were victorious in their battle. I watched the gate of the city for you. This time you watch the gate for me and leave me. I will choose warriors and I will show you what we can do. Yochanan and Shimon replied, Go out to them. Have your victory. The God of the temple and the sanctuary in Jerusalem will help you. Be careful that you not enter into serious battle because you might be captured or die. That would be a humiliation for us. God will watch me, replied Eleazar. I can depend on the righteousness of my father, Onias, the high priest. Let God not look at my wickedness. God can use a different occasion to punish me for my wickedness. Eleazar picked out 100 of his top soldiers, and he led them himself. That night before dawn, he attacked the Romans. He surrounded the towers used for the battering rams. The Romans who were guarding the siege towers had made huge bonfires against the cold of the night. 5,000 Roman legionnaires were there, along with 150 carpenters and ironworkers. This battle took place on the 27th of Kislev, 9 months after Titus had attacked Jerusalem. Eleazar left Jerusalem with 100 soldiers. They attacked the Romans suddenly. The Romans were lying around the fire warming up. Before the Romans could even stand on their feet, the Jews had killed every one of them. In their confusion, many Roman legionnaires ran into the bonfires and were burned. The Jews burned the beams of the battering rams and smashed the iron heads until the rams were no longer recognizable. The towers, the weights, the rings, the ropes, the chains, and all the other machinery were destroyed by the fire and the stones until nothing was left. The Jews also captured alive the carpenters and weapon makers and then burned them in the bonfire so that none survived. At daybreak, Titus saw the smoke from a distance. As it became light, he could see that the siege towers were burned and his men killed. The stench of the burning human flesh pervaded the entire Roman camp. He and all his camp ran to see what had happened. Meanwhile, Eleazar and his 100 men were carrying whatever they could of the burned siege machinery, as well as the heads of the carpenters who had been burned to death. They were marching, singing praise to God, laughing and mocking the Romans who were following them. They came to the gate of Jerusalem from which they had left, and Yochanan and Shimon greeted them in triumph. Around that time, many nations united and came to Jerusalem to help the Romans. They came from the entire Roman Empire, which encompassed a good deal of the civilized world. The emperor was then Vespasian, father of Titus. Titus told the elders of the nations who came to him all that he told them all that had happened in the battle against Jerusalem, how powerfully the Jews had battled and how they defeated his men. He was very depressed about the war, especially the destruction of all his siege machinery. The men were astounded. All the nations were amazed at his words. He said to them, "The Jews still have the power and fame. They have fought wondrous battles against us. I cannot tell even a small amount of it. You are the elders of the nations. In all your days have you ever seen 4 men standing up against 10,500 men trained in war? Have you ever seen a situation where over 10,000 men have not been able to capture a mere few warriors or kill them? Where 4 warriors could stand in their midst of 10,000 and kill them almost all at will, as if they were cutting cucumbers. This is what happened." When the elders of the nations heard this, they were astonished and did not know what to say. Titus then had a conference with the elders of the many nations who had come to help him, along with his officers. He said, "We must have a plan. What shall we do? We do not want to be completely humiliated. Word of this will get out all over the world. People who were not aware of the Jews and their strength will hear and will not believe what happened." The elders of the nations replied, "If it is good in your eyes, let us give you advice. The Romans are exhausted because of their battles with the Jews. Let the Roman legionnaires rest. We just came and we're fresh. We'll see if we can be successful in our battle against them. What are these Jews? Is it possible to stand up before a huge army like ours?" The Roman general said to Titus, "Don't admit this to them. They are just making us more miserable. They will also fall before the Jews. This will also be a humiliation for us. After all, we know their strategies, and still we cannot stand up to them. One of them can chase 1,000 of us. What will these other nations do, who have never been tested against them? They will be like little bushes compared to like great cedars." The elders of the nation said, "No, we will go against them and fight against them. We will be victorious." The elders urged Titus greatly. Finally, he gave them permission to attack the Jews and fight against them. He said, "Maybe the Jews will be so greatly outnumbered that they will be defeated. These are fresh troops. They are not afraid of the Jews because they do not know their power. When the Romans fight against the Jews now, we are deathly afraid." 70,000 men from the nations that had come to help the Romans gathered together. They were as follows: 10,000 Macedonians, 20,000 Britons, 5,000 Armenians, 10,000 African troops, 10,000 men from Begonia, 5,000 Arabs, 10,000 soldiers from Persia and Babylonia. All these troops went, not a single Roman among them. They advanced on the plain that was facing the grave of the high priest Yochanan. They started doing battle with the Jews on top of the wall. They raised siege ladders with protective coverings against the wall and began to climb the walls. Yochanan, the head of the terrorists, said to his allies, "If you agree, I would like to go out and fight against those uncircumcised men. Let us give them a taste of my power." Shimon said to them, "Let 2 of us go out and 1 stand at the gate. They are many. A small troop will not be able to defeat them." "Good advice," replied Eleazar. "I will go out with Yochanan." "As you say," said Shimon, "go out against them. May God of the temple and the sanctuary give them over into your hands. May he not judge you at this time according to your evil deeds." So Yochanan and Eleazar went out with 1,500 terrorist troops. They dealt the assembled nations a horrible defeat, killing numerous troops from morning until night. This occurred on the 9th of Tevet, the 10th month of Titus's siege on Jerusalem. Among the troops of these nations, 57,000 men died, 3,000 officers were captured alive, and the rest fled. 7 Jews fell on that day. The Jewish terrorists brought their bodies to Jerusalem and burned them so that the pagan Gentiles would not be able to desecrate their bodies. Yochanan and Eleazar came to Jerusalem with their armies, with songs of praise to God. Meanwhile, the survivors of those nations who had fled returned to Titus's camp in humiliation and defeat. "See what happened to you," said Titus. "You did not believe the Romans. Now the dead among you are also humiliations." The next day the terrorists took the 3,000 officers they had captured alive. They took each one and put out one eye and cut off one hand, and with this they sent them back to Titus in disgrace. Titus had a conference with his Roman generals and leaders, as well as with all the nations who had come to his aid. "What shall we do against Israel and its power?" he asked. Each of the generals had advice for Titus according to his understanding, but Titus denigrated whatever they said. He did not accept their words. He knew they were wrong. Finally, Titus said to them, "There is only one plan that will work against the Israelites. I will not turn aside from it. We will put the city under siege. We will not fight. Their food is gone. Let starvation defeat them. Furthermore, if we do not fight against them, if they do not have a common enemy, they will begin fighting amongst themselves. If we carry out our plan correctly, whatever we want to do to them, they will do to themselves." Titus's plan was accepted by all the people and by the generals. They laid siege to the city according to his orders. All roads leading to the city were closed off so the Jews could not attack suddenly. The Romans set up a permanent watch day and night at all the gates of the city so that no man could leave. People would not even be allowed to pick grass for nourishment. Famine began to strike the people of Jerusalem, and even the warriors were weakened. If not for the famine, the city would never have been breached or captured, and the Jewish soldiers could never have been defeated. Many people in Jerusalem began to die from starvation. So many people died that when the Jews wanted to bury their dead, there was no place to bury them. They began to pile up in the alleyways. Many Jews threw their dead into the cisterns, and they would fall in there alive and die with their relatives. Many Jews began to dig their own graves while still alive, and lie down in them for 1 or 2 days until they would die. They would remain there with no one to cover their graves, and no one to weep over them. Jerusalem remained with no one to bury the dead and no one to mourn for them. Weeping had ended. Tears had dried up, and the voices were silent. So great was the famine. All the streets were filled with corpses inside and outside. There was no one to gather them and no one to bury them. The evils of the famine were too many to be numbered. We cannot even mention 1 out of 1,000. At that time, wicked, irresponsible people of Jerusalem slandered Amittai, the high priest. They told Shimon, one of the 3 leaders of the terrorists, "Amittai, the high priest, who brought you to the city, wants to go out to the Roman camp. You know how wise he is and how good he is at devising plans. He knows all the entrances and byways of the city and the temple. Who knows? In the middle of the night, he might bring the Romans to the city. They will listen to him. He might even convince the guards at the gate or the soldiers on the wall to defect to the Romans. They know what will happen if they remain here." Shimon gave orders to bring Amittai, the high priest, and his 4 sons before him. While slanderers were going to fetch him, one of Amittai's sons fled to the Romans and came to Joseph the high priest. Joseph the priest. That's Josephus. Amittai and his other 3 sons were taken captive. When Amittai was brought before Shimon, he begged him, "I'm not asking you to keep me alive, but kill me quickly. Do not let me see my sons die." Shimon's heart was harsh, and he did not listen to his pleas. God wanted to punish Amittai for bringing Shimon to Jerusalem. Therefore, Amittai was killed by Shimon. Shimon repaid him evil for good. Shimon gave orders to the slanderers to hang Amittai on the wall facing the Romans. Shimon then approached him and said, "Amittai, why did the Romans not save you from our hands? I know you wanted to escape to them." Amittai remained silent and did not answer a word. Then Amittai began to plead again. He asked, "Just let me kiss my sons before I die." Shimon even refused this. Amittai then raised his voice and wept. He said to his sons, "My sons, I brought this murderer to Jerusalem. Therefore, I am as much a murderer as he is. It is all my fault. Whatever is happening to me and to you is my own fault. The day that I brought him, I deserved to die. I brought a terrorist and a murderer to God's holy city. I thought that he would help the city, but he did a great evil, and he turned Israelites into barbarians. He has been a stumbling block and a snare to us. One murderer here was not enough." That day, a number of men, women, and children left Jerusalem. They overcame the terrorists who were guarding the gates, opened the gates, and left the city, arriving at the Roman camp. They could no longer tolerate the famine and the evil done by the terrorists. The escapees were men of faith and leading citizens of Jerusalem. Joseph the priest, meaning Josephus, recognized them and told Titus that they had risked their lives to leave Jerusalem. Titus and his generals had great pity on them because Joseph had told them that they were leaders in Jerusalem. Titus received them and gave them food and drink. Many of them were so emaciated by the famine that they could not even open their mouths to eat. Others, when they ate, died from the food. When the little children saw the bread, they found that they could bite it but could not digest it. They could not tolerate it and died from bread in their mouths. The Jews who defected from Jerusalem to the Roman camp out of fear of the terrorists swallowed gold, silver, and precious stones to hide them from the terrorists. In the Roman camp, all those who survived and could eat the food would later go to the bathroom to cleanse their bodies. They would go alone and then go through the excrement to find the gold and precious stones that they had swallowed. When they found the precious objects in their excrement, they would hide them. The Jews did this every day while they were with the Romans. When some Arameans and Arabs saw that the Jews were doing, they laid in wait for them. They captured a number of the Jews, tore open their bellies, and found gold and precious stones inside their intestines. Over 2,000 Jews were disemboweled by the Arabs and Arameans. When Titus heard this wicked thing that the men of Aram and Arabia had done to the Jews, he was very angry at them. He gave orders that anyone who had done this should be arrested and killed. All their possessions were given to the surviving Jews. Over 6,000 Arameans and Arabs died as a result of this. Around that time, there was a scribe who was guarding one of the small gates of Jerusalem facing the Kidron Valley. He was a trustworthy man by the name of Menachem ben Saruk. His ancestors had been aides to Ezra the scribe in Babylon. Every day, Menachem would count the number of dead brought out of the city through the gate he guarded and kept an account of them. This was, besides the corpses thrown into the streets and the cisterns in that quarter of the city, the corpses thrown into the Kidron Valley from the wall on that side, those killed by the sword and those brought out of the other gates who had died in his quarter. Menachem discovered that through his gate alone, 115,808 corpses had been brought out. All of these were among the leaders of Jerusalem who were buried during the time when the terrorists were in charge. This is in addition to the people who were left lying on the ground, whose bodies were eaten by birds and wild animals. Titus interrogated the Jewish leaders who had escaped to him in the presence of Joseph the priest, who is Josephus. He said to them, "I am binding you by an oath that you tell me how many people died from the time that I came to Jerusalem until now." The leaders of the Jews took a mental count of the dead who had gone through the gates of Jerusalem to be buried during the time of the famine and the war. To their knowledge, there were 601,575 people. This was in addition to people who died in houses, streets, in addition to the people who died in houses, streets, and as a result of terrorist attacks who were not buried. This also did not count those who died in the temple in the suburbs of Jerusalem. Many people had died as a result of terrorist attacks and internal wars between one man and his brother. There were also many important leaders of Jerusalem whom the terrorists would not allow to be buried, and who lay on the ground. As the famine became worse in Jerusalem, it also started affecting the leaders of the terrorists. Until this time, they had not been bothered by the famine because they were stealing from everyone. But now the famine became so great that the terrorist leaders ate their horses. When their horses were gone, they ate their horses' dung as well as the leather of their saddles and weapons. When this was gone, they sought bark of trees, grasses, and plants that could not find any because the Romans had cut down all the trees and destroyed all the grass and plants for 13 miles all around Jerusalem. In all the gardens of Jerusalem, there were no trees, no grass, no plants, because the Romans had destroyed it all. Originally, Jerusalem had been surrounded with the most beautiful fruit trees, with orchards and gardens, but the Romans destroyed them all. The land around Jerusalem was now like a desolate desert. People who came from a distance, who had seen Jerusalem in its glory, with gardens and orchards, would now look and wonder at the great change that had taken place. After this, the Romans began to remount their campaign. They made a tremendous battering ram and approached the wall for a new battle to see if the Jews were still able to fight. The terrorist leaders and their cohorts went out to fight, but they were hungry, thirsty, and weak, and a huge number fell before the Romans. Titus said to his men, We will not fight a man-to-man battle. Let us break down the wall. The city only has one wall. We will then be able to breach the city and destroy the terrorists. The rest of this impoverished people wants peace, rest, and life. All the people and the generals approved of Titus's words. They all agreed to follow his plan. The leaders of the terrorists had known all along that the Romans would make another battering ram and would again attempt to break down the wall of Jerusalem. At that time, they built an inner wall to Jerusalem in the place where the battering ram would be used. It was the edge of the city near the grave of Yochanan the high priest. This was the only place where the Romans could set up the battering ram. Here, there were already 2 breaches that the Romans made in 2 outer walls of Jerusalem. This time, the terrorists did not have the power to burn down the battering ram as they did the first time. Therefore, they built an inner wall to stand up against the power of the battering ram. They built more walls inside. Each time the ram would be about to penetrate one wall, they would build another wall inside it. However, they did not have enough strength to fight anymore because of the great famine. The terrorists left Jerusalem. The Romans, however, saw that all their battering was to no avail, and they left the city. The terrorists said, Now the Romans have given up their siege against Jerusalem. They have gone. We have been saved. Let us return to God. However, the Romans regrouped. They strengthened their resolve as before. They set up watches, and one said to another, Let us be strong in our battles. It is a humiliation for us to return from these Jews who are dying of starvation. They are like dead because of the famine, and skin of their faces has dried up. The terrorists returned to Jerusalem in victory, and they began to terrorize the people. They told them, Give us food, or we will eat you and your children. The Roman legions then came and renewed their assault. They suddenly began battering the wall with the ram, and a portion of the innermost wall fell down. The Roman legions sounded the battle cry and said, Let us capture Jerusalem. However, when the Romans looked, they saw there was a new wall standing opposite the breach they had made. The Jews in the city also gave a great shout because they realized that the new wall they had built opposite the broken wall on the side facing Yochanan the high priest's grave would hold against the Romans. This was the area guarded by the leader, Yochanan. Those are 2 different Yochanans. The Romans heard the shout of the Jews from the city. They saw that the Jews had built a new wall inside and were standing on it. While the Romans were standing on the wall broken by the battering ram, the Romans were very confused and their joy turned into mourning. They did not know what to do with this arrogant people in Jerusalem. How could they take the city? Tens of thousands of Romans had died, but the Jews had not been conquered. The Romans eased up their battle. They had given up hope of capturing the city by battering down the wall. Titus said to them, "Here's the new wall that the Jews built. The mortar is still wet. It is not completely set because it was built recently. Bring the battering ram and we will tear it down. It will fall down easily and we'll capture the city. We will be able to do whatever we want, and it will make up for all our suffering in the siege." The Roman generals would not listen to his plan. They climbed the broken wall with their legions, while the Jews stood on the wall they had built opposite them. The two armies met and fought between the two walls. The Jews were victorious and chased the Romans from the broken wall. They chased them far from the city. The Jews then returned to Jerusalem. The Romans were weakened. They had given up any hope of victory. They said, "We will not fight against the city anymore. As long as we live, we will not capture it. Now let us get out of here before we all die. This will be the place of our death." Titus was trying to speak when one of his heroes by the name of Sabianos, who had been a soldier from his youth, spoke up and said to the Romans, "Romans, who among you will volunteer to go with me and attack these people? Let us fulfill the command of our emperor." Sabianos took his shield in his hand and an outstretched sword in his right hand. 11 of his chosen men went with him. Titus was surprised at Sabianos' strength and bravery. Meanwhile, the Jews were standing in the breach in the wall from which they had driven the Romans away. When the Jews saw Sabianos and his friends coming at them, they began to shoot arrows and throw stones at them. Still, Sabianos was not afraid of them and showed no hesitation. Sabianos came and encountered the Jews in the breach in the wall. When Sabianos approached the Jews, one of the Jews struck him with a sword and he fell on his face onto the ground. Sabianos got up on his knees, still fighting. One of the young Jewish men struck him with a death blow, but he still fought. The battle was more dear than his life. He would die rather than give up. Finally, he was killed along with 3 of his men. 8 of them returned to Titus alive, but mortally wounded. The Romans had seen their plight and had run to save them by bringing them back to the camp. The next day, however, they all died. However, Sabianos set an example for the Romans, and they were infused with a new spirit. That night, 20 of Titus's men volunteered to undertake a mission. They said, "Come, let us get into the city at night through the breach in the wall." They told this to Titus's flag bearer, and he went with them. A number of the best engineers came with them. They climbed the breach at night. The Jews were not aware of anything because they were sleeping, exhausted, and starving. The Romans came and climbed the wall. They sounded the war trumpet. When the Jews heard the sound, they were terrified and confused. They did not know what was happening. Titus heard the Roman war trumpet, and his men told him what was happening. He took his best men, and he also went to the breach. When the Jews got up in the morning, they saw Titus on the wall and were very surprised. The Romans gathered with Titus and climbed the wall. Many of them came to the place where the wall was open into the city. There was a subterranean tunnel under the wall, which the Jews entered and left the city. The battle then moved to Azarah, the courtyard of the Holy Temple. The Jews had congregated there, and they were attacked by the Romans. All the young soldiers of the Romans and their legionnaires came with drawn swords. All the weapons they had, all they had left were swords. The Jews also came with swords, and they joined in battle. This was the worst battle ever fought inside the city of Jerusalem. The Romans were close together, and the Jews were also, all on foot. No cavalry was involved in the battle. All of them fought with arrows and swords, striking at each other with no place to flee. They were so crowded together that there was no way one could escape the other. Pierced bodies fell one on top of the other. The noise of the battle could be heard from a distance. The victors blew the trumpets, and the vanquished screamed. The sound of clashing swords was heard, as well as the sound of steel striking against bone and against the helmet. The Romans cried out in victory, "This is the day we hoped for." The Jews also fought fiercely, saying, "There is no escape. We can only die for God, for his temple and his sanctuary. Let us be considered like sacrifices offered on the altar today." The courtyard of the temple was filled with blood from morning until 10 o'clock. The blood of the Romans mingled with the Jewish blood, flowing on the courtyard like a stream. In the end, there was corpses scattered about, but most of them were from the Romans. One of Titus's mighty warriors was a man by the name of Golinos. He was a Roman soldier who saw that the Jews were winning the battle and the Romans were giving up. Golinos became filled with wrath when he saw that most of the Romans were fleeing the courtyard before the Jews. Golinos ran to call the Jewish soldiers running after the Romans outside the courtyard. He ran to meet them in the Antioch corner and stood before them, not allowing them to chase the Romans. They returned to the temple courtyard, and Golinos ran after them. One of the Jews hit him on the shield with his sword. When Golinos saw that a Jew hit him, he jumped up from the ground as he had been trained to do. However, when he jumped, his foot caught on to one of the stones of the courtyard. He fell, mortally wounded. Golinos fell on his knees. He fought with some strength and killed one of the Jewish soldiers, but then he died. Titus waited for Golinos to come in battle, but he did not come because he was dead. When Titus heard that Golinos had fallen and died, he wanted to go to the temple courtyard, but his troops would not let him. They were afraid he would also fall. The Jews were all victorious over the hordes of Romans who came to the Azara on that day. Countless Roman corpses lay strewn about. The Jews undressed Golinos and all the Roman corpses and took their weapons. These are the names of the Jewish officers who defeated the Romans on that day. From the division of Yochanan, the main leader of the terrorist, Al-Asha and Yiftach. From the division of Shimon, the second terrorist leader, Malchiah and Yaakov the Edomite, the leader of the Edomians. In the third division, the general was the terrorist Eleazar ben Ameni, and his officers were Arshimon and Yehuda. These were the officers who, together with their troops, defeated the Romans that day in the Azara, the temple courtyard. The Jews chased the Romans and shut them up in the tower of Antonina, not allowing them to leave. Titus saw that the Antonina tower was a trap for the Romans, and he gave orders that it be torn down. This occurred on the 5th of Sivan, just before the Shavuot festival. It was the 14th month after Titus had come to Jerusalem, so over a year now. The next day was the festival of Shavuot. The Jews in Jerusalem celebrated the festival. Titus came to the temple close to the sanctuary because this was where the terrorists and the Jewish warriors were. Yosef ben Gurion, it says here Josephus, was with them. Titus called Yochanan. Sorry, hold on a second. Titus called Yochanan and the other officers from the terrorists in a loud voice, and Josephus translated. Titus said to Yochanan, "What has this temple done to you? Why do you want it ordered to be destroyed? If you are boasting of your strength, come out with your troops and let us fight where you wish." Yochanan, the terrorist leader, answered, "There is no sacrifice that we can bring to God in our temple, and there is no burnt offering that is better than our own flesh. There is no blood that can be sprinkled on the altar that is better than our blood. For our God, we will die and fight. We will be counted as burnt offerings and sheep. We will die free in the holy city and not as slaves in your hand." In the morning, the Jews separated into watches at the gate of the temple courtyard. A great battle was fought at the gate. Carialos and Rostios surrounded the temple with 30,000 legionnaires, so as not to allow a single Jew to escape. The war between the Jews and the Romans went on for 7 days. When the Romans knew that the tide of the battle had gone in favor of the Romans, they would press the Jews into Azara, the temple courtyard. Then the Jews would regroup and chase the Romans to the Antonina wall. This went on for 7 days. Then the Romans left the Jews and would not fight with them there. Titus gave orders to tear down the Antonina wall and to make a large open space for his camp. Meanwhile, the famine was very severe in Jerusalem. There was no food or any other necessities of life. The Jews could not go out. Some Jews, however, had the courage to go out at night and capture horses and donkeys and other animals from the Romans. This was the only food available. When the Jews started doing this every day, the Romans understood that the Jews were sneaking out of Jerusalem every night, stealing animals from the Romans to use for food. The Romans were angry about this and placed a watch around the camp so that the Jews would not be able to steal anymore. And I'll pick this up in part 3.